Alexander's intention to conquer the Persian Empire was no secret. But the first Macedonian strike on Persia was not taken seriously by King Darius.
Darius III was the great king of Persia. He came to the Persian throne in 336 BC.
Darius was told that Alexander and his army had breached Persian soil. The question then was, what would he do about it?
The Persians want to have an early victory against Alexander, nip it in the bud, fight him before he can advance far from where he's landed.
But the Persian response was insufficient. They were defeated at the Battle of Granicus, at the Battle of Issus, and at the Siege of Tyre. As Darius watched the surprising military success of the young general, he began to build up his army.
Many of his advisors said, don't fight regular battles with the Macedonian army. They're simply too good. The risk of losing is too great. Instead, avoid battle and retreat. Let the formidable terrain of Southwest Asia defeat Alexander. Destroy all the food, burn all the crops, give him nothing to eat. And that will go a long way towards defeating him. That kind of policy is very difficult for Darius to follow because he needs to prove himself, and traditionally a Persian king proves himself by winning battles.
Before a final military showdown with Alexander, Darius attempted to negotiate.
Darius sent several notes to Alexander, offering him peace treaty and various terms.
He told Alexander that if he would stop campaigning, that Darius would give him money, would give him half of his empire that he had already conquered up to that point, and even the hand of his daughter in marriage.
Alexander, in response, is said to have sent back letters saying, in effect, basically, why should I negotiate with you for something which already belongs to me?
Patipur!
Khrushiyata Buzarka.
Patipur!
Alejandros Prostarion Grafi. Yine yata ta kremeta katin Korano tu pasan.
What was at stake at Gaugamela was the entire Persian Empire. If Alexander could bring Darius to battle and defeat him, he would lay honest claim to rule of the Persian Empire.
Kautitaja hijahaka abarana.
Gaugamela Khrushiyata Buzarka.
Gaugamela. Atishtai, Adahan, Abarang, Gaugamela!
Darius had increased his army, drawing men from across the empire. As the Persian army began to move into place, Greek scouts reported to Alexander that Darius's army was larger than anything they had ever seen before.
The estimates are actually all over the field, but we suspect that he probably had around 200 to 250,000 men on the field, which would have been about 5 times the size of Alexander's force.
The Macedonian army, we think we have fairly certain figures for. We're talking about 40,000 infantry of all types and about 7,000 cavalry.
Alexander's second in command was Parmenio, a seasoned cavalry commander.
Parmenio was one of Philip's most trusted generals. He was also of the old school. He was one of the only generals that regularly stood up and argued with Alexander.
And in some cases, Alexander would ask Parmenio for advice, knowing that he would get a conservative answer from Parmenio. And therefore, he would understand how a conservative commander would view a certain situation. And oftentimes, he would then use that information to develop a plan that would counter a conservative reaction.
With the Macedonians outnumbered 5 to 1, the old general was worried. He wanted to attack while the enemy slept.
Tigar, apel ka na planastai kay Poye kay Kitfarme Oraderian.
Igoman an Alexandros, Igoman an es.
Kaigo. I Parmenian en. Aluk Ego Parmenian. Klepto Taniken. Tupame Tupori.
He was arrogant and brash, but he had to be to lead in that kind of an environment.
Darius had expected an attack in the dark and left his army standing on alert for the entire night. It was not a cohesive force, but a series of armed groups levied from the governors or satraps from every corner of the empire.
The king would go to the satrap and say, your tax this year is 1,000 men. And he might have a huge variety of these from different places. He fought with Ethiopians. He fought with Bactrians, who would be Afghanistan today. They were all over the place, and they may speak different languages, have different cultures, have different weapons.
Most Persian warriors wore no armor and no helmet. Each carried a spear 2.5 meters long and a shield made of wicker. But what the Persian army lacked in armor and weapons, they made up for in numbers. Their strategy was to use overwhelming force.
You think of the Persians, they're not a bunch of yahoos. The tactics that they're using have been effective for hundreds of years. The Persians have a huge empire. It's been good enough.
Against this enormous army, Alexander had one advantage: the Macedonian phalanx. Captain Dale Dye, a retired US Marine officer and military historian, has studied the Macedonian approach to warfare.
The Macedonian phalanx, probably the most potent weapon of war in the ancient world. The phalanx, blocks of individuals, 256 men, arranged 16 across by 16 deep.
Once you were in the formation and going forward, you really had no choice as to whether you were going to go backwards or not. You were definitely going forward with this massive wall of human muscle and spear points, and that's what made it so overwhelming.
In the front rank were the most veteran fighters, the fighters who had proved their courage, their bravery on the battlefield, who could be relied on to go forth and contact the enemy. He carried a small shield. The shield was suspended by a strap from his neck so that it would help support the weight. More importantly, that would allow his left hand, his shield hand, to be free. Not grasping the shield, but free, so that he could reach over and grasp his primary weapon. And his primary weapon was the sarissa. Now, we believe sarissas were somewhere between 16 and 18 feet long.
Up to this point, the principal combatants were carrying 7 to 8 foot spears. Philip gave the infantry longer spears. His phalanx now had greater standoff than the average Greek or Persians would have.
Think this way: 256 sarissas, 16 to 18 feet long, in front of the phalanx, a bristling hedgehog of spear points that the enemy could not get under, around, or over. How intimidating was the phalanx? Let's take a look at what a Persian trooper might have seen. Phalanx, battle positions, move! Ah!
At dawn on the morning of October the 1st, 331 BC, the phalanx began to form on the battlefield at Gaugamela.
Arrayed to the right of the phalanx was generally a unit of heavy infantry, what the Greeks called hoplites. They carried a large shield, unlike the smaller phalangite shield. The shield was known as a hoplon. In combat, it could be used to bludgeon the enemy, back him up, knock him over, which would provide time for the hoplite to use his primary sidearm, a sword, in many cases a leaf blade sword like this, a short sword, unlike the medieval cleavers that you see. This was a short sword designed to do butchery in tight. The hoplite could hide his weapon so that you had no idea where he was going to strike. He didn't advertise what he was going to do with the weapon. He could come in low, or he could come in high. He was not in the mood to sword fight with an enemy. He was in the mood to use his large hoplon shield to push that enemy back, to keep progressing, to never lose his own momentum, so that if the enemy should stumble or get his feet tangled up, he was on the ground. And when he was on the ground, the hoplite took care of him.
With the armies in place, the battle lines at Gaugamela had been drawn.
Darius was apparently planning Gaugamela to be the final battle.
The size of the Persian army surpassed any before seen in the ancient world, perhaps as large as 250,000 men. The army of Alexander consisted of just 45,000.
The stakes were high. For Darius, he knew that if he lost this battle, he would probably lose his empire. For Alexander, the stakes were high too. He had staked everything on defeating Darius and becoming the king of Persia.
Alexander was risking everything on this one battle. If he won, all the riches of the Persian Empire would be his. If he lost, 45,000 men would be slaughtered, and it would open the way for a Persian invasion of Greece. Quite simply, the outcome of the battle would determine the future of 2 continents. The Persian army was in disarray. Alexander had dented the might of the Persian Empire. But for his victory to be conclusive, he would have to kill the king.
The battle at Gaugamela was fought with the idea that Alexander would meet Darius mano a mano, one-on-one, kill him, mount his head on a cavalry spike.
Alexander realized that if you could cut the head off the snake, the rest of the snake would die.
But just as Alexander was within striking distance of the fleeing Darius, he stopped his pursuit. Alexander realized that Parmenian's troops were near collapse and would soon be overwhelmed. They needed his help. Alexander had to make a decision that might change the outcome of the battle. Pursue Darius or save his troops.
Rowage! El Dorado!
He made the smart decision. He turned, left Darius to flee, and saved his army. Alexander ran directly into a wall of confused soldiers falling to the rear.
There's no question that he was an active fighting commander who went in harm's way and reveled in it.
Alexander's rescue of Parmenio was one of the hardest fought parts of the battle. And the young commander suffered combat wounds as grave as those of his soldiers. For Alexander, the moment was bittersweet.
He rescued his left. He saved his army. And he won the battle at Gaugamela.
By the late afternoon, the battle was over, and the legend of Alexander the Great had begun.
For Alexander, the Battle of Gaugamela was, you might say, the final decisive battle. In fact, after this, Alexander begins to take for himself the titles of the Persian Great King.
Alexander continued traveling east, conquering the rest of the Persian Empire, crossing the deserts of present-day Afghanistan to conquer the armies of India.
And the reason he kept going, I think, was that he just wanted to do things that nobody had ever done, to leave an undying fame and undying glory.
He never lost a battle. He was the most successful commander that we study in the Western world.
He was a brilliant tactician. He was a brilliant statesman. He was a charismatic individual that sort of exuded an aura about him of power.
If I were making the list of great commanders, I would put Alexander at the top. I truly think he deserves the title great.
Darius escaped into the surrounding mountains, only to be murdered within the year by one of his own generals. Alexander declared himself Lord of Asia. No one could deny him that title.
Alexander was great because he had such clarity in his goals. He managed to infect the people around him with such love for him and desire to accomplish his missions that it was a tidal wave of force that couldn't be stopped. And that's the mark of a great man.